In 1897, a fleet of 75 electric taxis, known as Hummingbirds, began gliding through the streets of London, quiet, rechargeable, and seemingly years ahead of their time. For a brief moment, they appeared to represent the future of urban transport. But just 2 years later, they had vanished completely. This is the story of the London Electrical Cab Company. How a brilliant idea rose quickly, but unravelled just as suddenly when an unforeseen technological weakness began to compromise the entire operation. In the mid-1890s, a small group of businessmen gathered to consider a new approach to urban transportation, proposing an idea that, at the time, must have seemed ambitious, if not slightly improbable. Yet electrical vehicle technology had already been explored in the United States and parts of Europe, and what they were suggesting was not without precedent. Their aim was straightforward: to replace the horse with a battery and electric motor, and in doing so establish the first electric cab service in London. To develop the concept, they brought in the engineer Walter Bersey, who became the central figure in the project and the designer of the vehicles that came to be known as the Bersey electric cabs. When these vehicles entered service in London in August 1897, they formed one of the first organised fleets of self-propelled taxis available for public hire anywhere in the world. From the outset, the intention was practical rather than symbolic. London's transport system was still dominated by horses, and this created a set of problems that were widely recognised at the time. Horses required constant care, could only work for limited periods, and produced large quantities of waste, which accumulated in the streets. The electric cab was presented as a way of removing those constraints while retaining the basic function of the cab itself. In appearance, the vehicles remained close to what people were already familiar with. They followed the general form of the existing hansom cabs, which made them easier for passengers to accept. The real difference lay in how they moved. Powered by rechargeable lead-acid batteries, they used an electric motor connected to the rear wheels, allowing them to operate without combustion or steam. There was no need to start the vehicle by hand, no visible engine in motion, and far less noise than either horse-drawn traffic or early petrol vehicles. It was this relative quietness that led to their nickname, the Hummingbirds. Their black and yellow livery made them instantly recognisable and added to their distinctly modern appearance. The experience they offered was, by the standards of the time, notably refined. They could be started immediately, moved smoothly at low speeds, and were particularly well suited to the short stop-start journeys that defined movement within London. For a city built around relatively compact travel patterns, these characteristics made them a credible alternative to both horse-drawn and early petrol vehicles, which at that stage were often unreliable and mechanically demanding. The company organised its operations around a central yard in Lambeth, where the vehicles could be maintained and their batteries recharged. The system depended on keeping enough cabs in constant circulation, with some returning to the yard for charging or servicing, while the remainder continued operating on the streets. The lead-acid batteries were recharged by connecting the vehicles to a direct electrical supply, with current passed through the cells to restore their charge, a process that required several hours and careful supervision. Although the equipment was far simpler, it bore a clear resemblance to the basic principle of modern charging systems. Battery exchange systems were also used to reduce downtime, with depleted batteries removed and replaced with charged ones using lifting equipment. At its peak, the fleet grew to around 75 vehicles, and the company attracted significant public attention. The cabs charged fares similar to those of horse-drawn taxis, and there was an expectation that the system could be expanded if it proved commercially viable. For a brief period, it appeared that this might be the beginning of a larger transition in urban transport. The difficulties, however, became apparent quite quickly as the operation began to take hold. The core limitation lay in the batteries. Lead-acid technology was reliable, but heavy, and the battery packs could add several hundred kilograms to each cab. This placed considerable strain on the tyres, which at the time were typically solid rubber, and wore out quickly on London's uneven roads. As the tyres degraded, vibration increased, and this vibration affected the batteries themselves, which relied on glass components that were vulnerable to damage. The result was a system in which different forms of wear reinforced one another. Heavy vehicles accelerated tyre wear, worn tyres increased vibration, and vibration damaged the batteries, leading to further expense and reduced reliability. These were not isolated issues, but persistent operational problems that proved difficult to resolve. Range was another constraint. The cabs could typically travel around 30 miles on a full charge, which was enough for certain patterns of urban use, but still required careful management. Charging was slow, and although battery swapping helped reduce downtime, it did not remove the underlying limitations of energy storage. The whole system depended on maintaining a delicate balance between use, maintenance, and charging, and in the end that balance proved difficult to sustain economically. At the same time, external conditions were changing in ways that favoured competing technologies. Petrol-powered vehicles, though still developing, were improving in reliability and becoming easier to operate. Fuel was becoming more widely available, and petrol vehicles offered greater range and flexibility, particularly as road conditions improved and journeys began to extend beyond short urban distances. These broader developments did not immediately displace the electric cab, but they altered the conditions in which it operated. Electric propulsion worked well within the controlled environment of the city, whereas petrol vehicles were better suited to a transport network that was becoming more flexible and wide-ranging. Financially, the London Electrical Cab Company struggled to sustain its model. The cost of maintaining the vehicles and infrastructure exceeded expectations, and reliability issues affected operations and public confidence. There were also incidents that drew attention, including a well-documented case in which a driver of an electric cab became the first person in Britain to be charged with drunk driving after losing control of his vehicle. While such events were not the primary cause of the company's failure, they contributed to its public profile at a time when it could ill afford negative attention. By August 1899, just 2 years after the cabs had entered service, the company had failed. Its assets were sold, and the fleet was withdrawn from the streets of London. A small number of vehicles continued in limited use for a short period, but the system as a whole had come to an end. In immediate terms, the venture was regarded as an unsuccessful business. It had not achieved financial stability, and it had not expanded as intended. Yet its longer-term significance lies elsewhere. It demonstrated that electric vehicles could operate as part of a functioning urban transport system, that they could meet the expectations of passengers, and that they could address practical problems associated with existing forms of transport. What it could not overcome were the constraints of the technology available at the time, and the difficulty of building a supporting system that was both reliable and economical. The subsequent dominance of petrol was not simply the result of a superior machine, but of a system that proved easier to expand and maintain under the conditions of the early 1900s. The London Electrical Cab Company therefore stands as an early example of a technological path that was explored and shown to be workable, but which could not yet be sustained at scale. Its failure did not mark the end of the electric vehicle as an idea, but it did mark the end of its first serious attempt to establish itself within everyday urban life.